She built a mansion on my land. Now she's watching it get demolished. Karen forged my signature, scammed the HOA, and built her dream home on land she didn't own. So I took her to court, proved her fraud, and made her pay to tear it all down. Now, she's bankrupt, humiliated, and my land is finally mine again, right where it belongs. Jason Crawford never thought much about the small plot of land he had inherited from his grandfather. It was just there, untouched and used, and sitting in a quiet suburban neighborhood he hadn't visited in years. At one point, he had considered selling it or maybe building a vacation home, but life always had a way of pushing those thoughts aside. Work, responsibilities, and the constant rhythm of city life kept him busy, and the land faded into the background of his mind, a nostalgic relic rather than a priority. That was until one Saturday morning when everything changed. Sitting on his couch with a fresh cup of coffee, Jason did what he did every weekend, mindlessly scrolled through his phone, catching up on the news, checking emails, and flipping through social media. That's when an article caught his attention. HOA President's Dream Home, a testament to visionary leadership. The headline was bold, accompanied by a sleek, high-resolution photo of a massive, modern mansion. Floor-to-ceiling windows, meticulously landscaped gardens, and a driveway that screamed money. The article was from a local real estate blog, praising the house as the crown jewel of the neighborhood, a shining example of luxury and elegance. Jason wasn't usually interested in real estate articles, but something about the image made his stomach twist. It wasn't the house itself, it was the land beneath it. The way the property stretched, the placement of the trees in the background, the slight slope of the terrain, it all felt eerily familiar, like a memory just out of reach. A flicker of doubt passed through his mind. It's probably just a coincidence. Lots of land looks similar. Still, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling. That land looked exactly like his grandfather's property. Setting his coffee down, Jason pulled out his phone and scrolled through his saved photos. Somewhere in his gallery, buried under years of random pictures, was an old photo he had taken the last time he visited the property. When he finally found it and placed it side by side with the article's image, his heart pounded. The same distinct oak tree stood tall near the property's edge, its wide branches stretching out like an old guardian. The curve of the land was identical. Even the way the sunlight hit the space looked eerily the same. A cold wave of realization washed over him. That's my land. But how the hell was there a multi-million-dollar mansion sitting on it? Jason's hands tightened around his phone as he stared at the images side by side. The same towering oak tree, the same slope of the land, the same everything except now, instead of an empty lot, there was a luxurious mansion standing in its place. His stomach nodded. There had to be an explanation, right? Maybe it was a mistake, a trick of perspective, or just some bizarre coincidence. But deep down, he knew better. Determined to prove himself wrong or right, Jason dug through his files. Somewhere in the depths of his apartment, beneath stacks of unopened mail and long-forgotten paperwork, was his property deed. He found it in a worn manila folder, its edges curled from years of neglect. Flipping through the documents, he searched for anything, a sale record, a transfer notice, anything that would explain why there was suddenly a multi-million-dollar house sitting on his land. Nothing. The property was still legally his. No transactions, no agreements, no sign that he had ever relinquished ownership. His confusion turned to anger. Someone had built an entire house on land they didn't own. How was that even possible? Without another thought, Jason grabbed his keys and headed for the door. The drive to his grandfather's old neighborhood was surreal. He barely remembered the last time he had been here, yet the road still felt familiar. Nostalgic, almost. But the closer he got, the more that nostalgia twisted into unease. As he turned onto the street where his land should have been, his heart sank. The open space he once knew was completely gone. In its place stood an ultramodern mansion, gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. A massive iron gate guarded the entrance, with security cameras perched like sentinels on either side. The neatly paved driveway curved up to an oversized front door, and a bold, private property sign hung prominently on the fence. Jason pulled over and took a long, steady breath. This is insane. He stepped out of his car and walked toward the gate, the surreal nature of the situation making his head spin. Up close, the house looked even more extravagant. Glass paneling, marble accents, a yard so perfectly landscaped it felt artificial. He scanned the gate and found an intercom system mounted on the side. Pressing the button, he waited. A few seconds later, a woman's voice crackled through the speaker. Yes? Who is this? Jason's jaw clenched. This is Jason Crawford. I'm the owner of this land, and I'd like to speak to whoever's living here. A pause. Then an irritated sigh. Mr. Crawford, this property is under the jurisdiction of the Homeowner Association. I'm Karen DeWitt, the HOA president and the owner of this home. If you have concerns, you can contact our office. Jason felt his blood boil. This land isn't part of any HOA, he shot back. It's my private property, and I never gave anyone permission to build here. Karen's voice turned cold. I don't appreciate baseless accusations, Mr. Crawford. The Homeowner Association has full authority over this development. If you'd like to discuss this further, I suggest you make an appointment. Before Jason could respond, the intercom cut off. The gate remained firmly shut. Jason stood there, fists clenched, staring at the mansion that shouldn't exist. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was furious. Karen DeWitt had no intention of giving him a straight answer. But he wasn't going to let this go. Jason sat at his kitchen table, frustration burning through him as he flipped through every document he had on the property. The deed was crystal clear. He was still the legal owner. No sales, no transfers, no agreements. Yet somehow, Karen DeWitt had built a mansion on land that wasn't hers. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to get them by pressing an intercom button. If Karen wouldn't explain how she managed to claim his land, he'd find out himself. The next morning, Jason drove to the county records office, walking into a drab government building lined with old filing cabinets and flickering fluorescent lights. The clerk at the counter barely looked up as he asked for every document tied to his land. After a few minutes of typing, she frowned. There's been recent activity on this lot, she muttered, scrolling through her screen. Do you want all the filings, or just the most recent ones? Jason's pulse quickened. Everything, he said firmly. A few minutes later, he was handed a thick stack of official records, receipts, and permits. Back home, Jason spread the papers out across his table and started digging. It didn't take long before he found it. A declaration of annexation claiming that his property had been absorbed into the Homeowner Association's jurisdiction. His signature was at the bottom, a signature he had never written. His stomach dropped. The document was a complete forgery. That wasn't the only thing. Another file contained construction permits for the mansion, all listing Karen as the legal owner of the land. The documents had been approved by zoning officials based on the fraudulent annexation claim. Jason stared at the pages in disbelief. Karen hadn't just stolen his land. She had manipulated every level of the system to make it look legitimate. This wasn't just a mistake. This was fraud. Jason needed someone who knew how to tear this apart in court. After a few calls and some research, he found Lisa Hartman, a real estate attorney with a reputation for being relentless in property disputes. When he explained his situation, she didn't even hesitate. This is serious, she said, flipping through the documents Jason had scanned and sent her. If Karen forged your signature to annex your land, we have a strong case. That alone is criminal fraud. She leaned forward. But this isn't just about your property. If she used Homeowner Association funds to build her mansion, that's misappropriation. If we can prove that, we're not just looking at a civil case. She could be facing criminal charges. Jason exhaled, his anger shifting into something sharper. He wasn't just fighting for his land anymore. Karen DeWitt had spent years manipulating the system, assuming no one would challenge her. She had picked the wrong person to steal from. Jason had always thought of homeowner associations as minor inconveniences, annoying, maybe, but not outright corrupt. But the more he dug into Karen DeWitt's history as HOA president, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about his stolen land. Karen had been running the neighborhood like her own personal kingdom, using fear, intimidation, and ridiculous fines to keep people in line. Through online forums and social media, Jason reached out to current and former residents of the community. At first, most people were hesitant to talk. Some ignored him outright. Others replied with vague comments about how the HOA was strict, but that's just how things worked. But when he spoke to Frank Collins, a retired veteran who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years, the floodgates opened. Frank didn't bother hiding his frustration. That woman is a damn dictator, he said, his voice heavy with resentment. I got fined $500 for leaving my trash can out an hour too long. Another time, she tried to force me to repaint my front door because it wasn't an approved shade of beige, and that was another $1,200 fine. She uses the HOA to shake people down for money, and if you push back, she threatens to take legal action, or worse. Jason listened, anger simmering beneath the surface. This was bigger than he thought. Frank wasn't just upset about unfair rules. He was describing a full-scale extortion operation. Then Jason met Elena Rodriguez, a single mother who had nearly lost her home because of Karen's corruption. I fell behind on my HOA fees after my daughter got sick, she explained. It was only a couple of months, nothing crazy. But Karen suddenly doubled my fees, said I owed her thousands of dollars in late penalties. She sent me a foreclosure notice and said if I didn't pay up, she'd take my house. Elena's voice shook as she added, I had to borrow money from family just to keep a roof over my daughter's head. And Karen had the nerve to tell me I should be grateful she didn't take me to court. Jason clenched his fists. This wasn't just about stolen land anymore. This was about people's homes, their livelihoods, their security. And Karen had been weaponizing the HOA to ruin lives. Many other residents shared similar horror stories. Some had been forced to pay thousands of dollars in bogus violations. Others had been threatened with lawsuits if they even dared to question Karen's rules. A few had even been forced to sell their homes, unable to keep up with the arbitrary fines. Most of them had been too scared to fight back until now. Jason had started this battle to reclaim what was rightfully his. But now, it was about something more. Karen DeWitt wasn't just a thief. She was a predator. And Jason was going to make sure she paid for it. Jason wasted no time. With Lisa Hartman leading the charge, they filed a lawsuit against Karen DeWitt, citing property fraud, illegal annexation, and misappropriation of HOA funds. The evidence was damning: forged documents, fake signatures, and zoning permits based on outright lies. But Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly. Instead, she doubled down. Karen countersued, claiming Jason had abandoned the land, making it eligible for HOA annexation under some obscure bylaw. It was a laughable defense. Jason still paid property taxes and had never agreed to be part of the HOA, but it was enough to stall the case and create a legal headache. As word spread, the media got involved, turning the case into a local scandal. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a corrupt HOA president stealing land from a rightful owner. Journalists started digging deeper, uncovering complaints from other homeowners and years of Karen's unchecked abuse of power. Inside the courtroom, Karen tried to maintain her usual smug confidence, but Lisa was relentless. The case quickly collapsed against her as evidence piled up. The forged annexation document, with a fake signature claiming Jason had willingly handed over his land. A forensic expert testified that the signature was an obvious forgery. Financial records showing HOA funds were used for Karen's mansion. Lavish purchases labeled as community improvements turned out to be custom furniture, luxury landscaping, and even a private pool. Karen's own email to the contractor, where she admitted she didn't actually own the land but assured them the paperwork would be sorted out. The courtroom was packed with local residents, many of whom had suffered under Karen's leadership. They sat quietly, watching as their former HOA dictator unraveled under pressure. Karen's attorney tried to spin the narrative, claiming she had made an honest mistake, that she believed she had the right to develop the land, but it was useless. She had lied. She had forged documents. She had stolen from homeowners. And now, she was losing everything. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Karen DeWitt sat at the defense table, her usual smugness faltering under the weight of the evidence stacking against her. The judge had allowed witness testimonies from community members, and one after another, they painted a picture of a tyrant who had ruled the neighborhood with fear and greed. First came Frank Collins, the retired veteran, who detailed how Karen had drained him with unjust fines and threats of legal action. She fined me for having a flower pot in the wrong shade of blue. $500, he said, shaking his head. That wasn't about rules. That was about control. Then Elena Rodriguez took the stand, voice shaking as she recounted how Karen had nearly taken her home over inflated HOA fees. I was behind on payments, sure, she admitted. But the extra fees? The late penalties? It was all designed to force me out, to make me desperate. The judge listened, unimpressed by Karen's defense team's weak attempts to discredit the witnesses. But the final blow came when Lisa introduced the forensic handwriting expert. The expert confidently testified that the signature on the annexation document, the one that supposedly granted Karen the right to take Jason's land, was a forgery. It wasn't even a good one. This was traced from another document, likely lifted from a scanned record, the expert explained. It's an intentional act of fraud. Karen's face went pale. Lisa didn't stop there. She pulled out the email Karen had sent to the mansion's contractor, where she openly admitted that she didn't actually own the land but assured him that the paperwork will be sorted out. You knew this land wasn't yours, Lisa said, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom. You built that mansion hoping Jason would never notice. You assumed he wouldn't fight back, didn't you? Karen shifted uncomfortably. Her lawyer objected, but the judge let Lisa continue. "Tell me, Ms. DeWitt," Lisa pressed, "was that the plan? Wait for Jason to forget, push the paperwork through, and hope no one questioned it?" Karen snapped. "It wasn't supposed to be a big deal," she blurted. "The land was just sitting there, wasted. I thought I was doing something good for the neighborhood." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. That was it. The admission. The judge sat back, expression unreadable as he reviewed the evidence one last time. Then, with deliberate finality, he delivered his ruling. The annexation was fraudulent and legally void. Jason Crawford was the sole owner of the land. Karen had no legal claim to the mansion. It had been built on stolen property. She was ordered to vacate the home immediately and pay for its demolition at her own expense. She was found liable for fraud and misappropriation of HOA funds, resulting in hefty fines and criminal charges. Karen visibly crumbled as the reality of the verdict set in. Jason, meanwhile, felt the weight of months of frustration, anger, and disbelief finally lift. He had won, not just for himself, but for every person Karen had wronged. Justice had been served, but the fight wasn't over yet. Karen still had one last humiliation ahead of her, watching her stolen mansion get torn to the ground. Karen fought until the bitter end, filing delays and making last-ditch attempts to stall the inevitable, but the judge's ruling was final. She was out of legal options. The court gave her 30 days to vacate the mansion and arrange for its demolition, but when the deadline arrived, she was still there, refusing to leave. Jason, expecting as much, worked with Lisa to file a motion to enforce the eviction. The judge granted her one final week, warning that failure to comply would result in additional fines and possible jail time. It wasn't until the very last day that moving trucks finally appeared in front of the mansion. Jason stood across the street, watching as Karen's lavish furniture, designer rugs, and expensive artwork were loaded up. She never once looked in his direction. When the last truck pulled away and the mansion stood hollow and lifeless, Jason felt the first real sense of closure. A week later, the demolition crew arrived. The process started early in the morning, and Jason made sure to be there. The once grand mansion, a symbol of Karen's arrogance and corruption, was reduced to rubble piece by piece. Walls collapsed under the force of wrecking balls, the pristine glass windows shattered, and the ornate driveway was torn apart. By the time the dust settled, there was nothing left but open land, just as Jason remembered it from his childhood. The towering oak tree, untouched by the destruction, stood tall, as if reclaiming its place as the rightful guardian of the property. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had undergone its own transformation. With Karen gone, the HOA held a special election, and for the first time in years, the residents had a voice. A new board was formed, composed of people committed to fairness and transparency, ensuring that no one else would suffer the way Jason, Frank, and Elena had. The fear that had gripped the community for so long was finally gone, replaced by a newfound sense of unity. With his land fully restored, Jason made a decision. He wasn't going to let it sit empty any longer. This place had history, meaning, and memories worth preserving. Instead of selling it or keeping it as a distant inheritance, he would build a home, one that honored his grandfather's legacy. He worked closely with an architect, ensuring the design felt personal, simple, and meaningful. No extravagant mansions, no unnecessary luxury, just a home that belonged here, surrounded by the land that had always been his. The lot that Karen had tried to steal, the land she had manipulated and abused the system to claim, was finally back where it belonged. This wasn't just about winning a lawsuit or tearing down an illegal mansion. It was about reclaiming something deeper, something that could never be taken away again. Months passed, and in that time, Jason's land transformed. The mansion that had once symbolized Karen's arrogance was long gone, and in its place stood something far simpler, a home that actually belonged. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't oversized, but it was his. A place built not for show, but for peace, memories, and a fresh start. The house blended seamlessly with the land, as if it had always been meant to be there, standing under the same towering oak tree that had watched over the property for generations. To celebrate, Jason decided to host a small gathering, inviting the people who had supported him throughout the ordeal. Frank was there, along with Elena and several other neighbors who had once been too afraid to stand up to Karen. The atmosphere was light, filled with genuine laughter and relief, as if the neighborhood itself had finally exhaled after years of silent suffering. It wasn't just about Jason reclaiming his land. It was about the entire community reclaiming its voice. As the evening wound down and guests filtered out, Jason lingered outside, standing beneath the old oak tree, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't even realized he needed. This fight had started because of one stolen piece of land, but it had become so much more. It had been about justice, about standing up when no one else could, about proving that power and manipulation wouldn't win in the end. A few days later, an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just his name neatly written across the front. Inside was a single page, typed, but signed at the bottom in shaky handwriting. Jason, I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. You were right to stand your ground, and I was wrong to assume no one would fight back. I hope you can find peace on that land. Karen. Jason read it twice, then once more, before folding it carefully and tucking it away. He didn't feel satisfaction, nor anger, just a quiet understanding that some battles leave scars, but they also bring lessons. As he stood beneath the oak tree, the evening sun filtering through its branches, he let out a breath he felt like he had been holding since this all began. The land was his again, not just legally, but in spirit. It was no longer just a property in his name. It was a place for new memories, new beginnings, and the life ahead of him. And for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace.